The airplane cabin hummed with a low drone of engines, a packed flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, filled with the usual mix of business travelers, families, and tourists. In row 27, seat C, sat Clara Thompson, a woman in her late 40s with a plain denim jacket, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Her graying hair was pulled into a simple bun, and her eyes, sharp but unassuming, scanned the worn paperback novel. Around her, passengers chatted, laughed, or buried their noses in screens, but Clara seemed invisibly until she wasn't. A man in a crisp suit, 2 rows ahead, turned to his colleague and smirked, pointing subtly at Clara. "Look at her," he whispered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Bet she's never even left her small town. Probably thinks this flight's the adventure of her life." His colleague chuckled, and a few others joined in, their glances darting toward Clara. She didn't flinch, her face still buried in her book, but her fingers tightened around the pages. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family, and we're diving into a tale that'll keep you hooked. Little did those mocking passengers know, Clara wasn't just a simple woman, and in the next hour, this ordinary flight would become anything but. Clara had always been easy to underestimate. Growing up in a small Nebraska town, she'd been the quiet kid who preferred fixing engines in her dad's garage to chasing popularity. Her hands were calloused by 16, her mind sharp from studying flight manuals she'd sneak from the local library. She wasn't one for attention, but she had a fire inside here, a fire that had carried her through years of training, sacrifice, and a career most people couldn't even dream of. Now, at 48, she was on this flight for a reason she hadn't shared with anyone. She was heading to LA to visit her daughter, Lily, who was struggling through her first year of college, feeling lost in a big city. Clara had booked the cheapest ticket, packed light, and kept to herself, hoping for a quiet trip. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. The plane had been airborne for about an hour when the first sign of trouble hit. A faint shudder rippled through the cabin, like a hiccup in the air. Most passengers didn't notice, too absorbed in their movies or conversations. But Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. She knew that feeling, a subtle vibration that wasn't quite right. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back at her book, trying to convince herself it was nothing. But then it happened again, stronger this time, and a murmur spread through the cabin. The man in the suit, who'd mocked her earlier, laughed nervously. "Great. Turbulence. Just what I need before my big meeting." His colleague rolled his eyes, but Clara's heart was racing. She'd felt that kind of shudder before, decades ago, in a different kind of aircraft, a one where she was the one in control. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice came through. "Combat's trained, folks. This is Captain Reynolds. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties, but we're working on it. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The words were meant to reassure, but Clara could hear the edge in his voice, the kind of edge that comes when a pilot knows something the passengers don't. She set her book down, her hand steady but her mind racing. She'd spent years in cockpits, not as a commercial pilot but as something far rarer, a fighter pilot, one of the first women to fly combat missions in the U.S. Air Force. She'd logged thousands of hours in F-16s, dodging missiles, navigating storms, and landing on carriers in conditions that would make most pilots sweat. But that was years ago, before she'd retired to a quieter life, raising Lily and keeping her past to herself. Now, on this civilian flight, she was just Clara, the simple woman in 27C. The cabin grew quieter, the air thick with unease. A baby cried in the back, and a flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her smile tight. Clara's eyes flicked to the window, where the wing was visible, its flaps moving slightly. She noticed something, a faint flicker of light near the engine, almost imperceptible. Her stomach dropped. She'd seen that before, too, during a training mission when an engine had started to fail. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, ignoring the curious stares from nearby passengers. The man in the suit snorted. "What's she doing? Going to fix the plane herself?" His colleague laughed, but Clara didn't hear them. She was already moving toward the front, her steps steady despite the plane's slight rocking. At the galley, a young flight attendant, barely out of her 20s, stopped her. "Ma'am, You need to return to your seat. It's not safe to be up right now. Clara's voice was calm but firm. I need to speak to the captain. Now, the flight attendant blinked, unsure, but something in Clara's eyes steady, unyielding made her hesitate. Before she could respond, the plane lurched again, harder this time, and a chorus of gasps filled the cabin. The intercom crackled once more, and Captain Reynolds' voice came through, no longer hiding his urgency. This is your captain. We're experiencing a critical issue with one of our engines. If there's anyone on board with flight experience, see a military, commercial, anything, please make yourself known to the crew immediately. The cabin erupted in whispers, fear rippling through the passengers like a wave. The man in the suit went pale, his earlier bravado gone. Clara didn't hesitate. She pushed past the flight attendant, who was too stunned to stop her, and knocked on the cockpit door. It opened a moment later, revealing Captain Reynolds, a man in his 50s with sweat beading on his forehead. His co-pilot, a younger man named Harris, was frantically flipping switches, his hands shaking. "Who are you?" Reynolds demanded, his voice hoarse. Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "Clara Thompson, retired Air Force. I flew F-16s for 12 years, combat missions included. I've handled engine failures in worse conditions than this. Let me help." Reynolds stared at her, disbelief warring with desperation. The cockpit was a mess of flashing lights and warning alarms, the control panel a chaos of data. Harris looked up, his face ashen. "We've lost the left engine completely, and the right one starting to overheat. We're losing altitude fast." Clara didn't flinch. She'd been in cockpits under fire, with missiles locking onto her jet, and she'd always found a way out. "Can you stabilize the thrust on the right engine?" she asked, stepping closer. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. "We're trying, but the system's not responding like it should. We've got maybe 20 minutes before we're in real trouble." Clara slid into the jump seat, her eyes scanning the instruments. It had been years since she'd touched a commercial jet's controls, but the principles were the same. Her hands moved instinctively, checking the fuel flow, the hydraulic pressure, the altimeter. "You're getting a false reading on the right engine," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "It's not overheating, it's a sensor glitch. You need to override the automated system and manually adjust the thrust." Harris gaped at her. "How do you know that?" Clara didn't look at him, her focus on the panel. "Because I've seen it before. Trust me." Back in the cabin, the passengers were growing restless, some praying, others clutching their armrests. The man in the suit, whose name was Greg, was sweating through his expensive shirt, his earlier mockery replaced by panic. "Who was that woman?" he muttered to his colleague, who shrugged, equally shaken. The flight attendants were doing their best to keep everyone calm, but the plane's occasional dips and shudders weren't helping. A woman across the aisle, holding her young son, started to cry softly. "We're going to be okay, right?" she whispered to no one in particular. No one answered. In the cockpit, Clara was in her element, her mind racing but her hands steady. She and Reynolds worked in tandem, her suggestions sharp and precise. "Cut the fuel to the left engine completely," she said. "It's dead weight now. Redirect everything to the right and stabilize the flaps." Reynolds followed her lead, his initial skepticism fading as her commands started to work. The plane's descent slowed, the nose leveling out slightly. Harris, still shaken, muttered, "You're not just some passenger, are you?" Clara didn't respond. There wasn't time. But the crisis wasn't over. The right engine, though still functional, was straining under the load of carrying the entire plane. Clara knew they couldn't make it to La. They'd need to land soon, and the nearest airport was a small regional strip in Nevada, not equipped for a jet this size. "Can you get us to Hawthorne?" she asked Reynolds. He shook his head, his face grim. "It's too short. We'd overshoot the runway." Clara's mind flashed back to a mission in the Gulf, when she'd landed her damaged F-16 on a makeshift strip barely half the regulation length. "I've done it before," she said quietly. "I can do it again." Reynolds stared at her, then nodded. "All right, you're calling the shots." He radioed air traffic control, his voice steady now, bolstered by Clara's presence. "This is Flight 214, declaring an emergency. We're diverting to Hawthorne Regional. Request immediate clearance." The controller's voice crackled back, laced with doubt. "Flight 214, That runway's not rated for your aircraft. Are you sure? Clara leaned forward, speaking into the mic. We'll make it work. Just clear the approach. The next 15 minutes were a blur of calculations, adjustments, and quiet intensity. Clara took the co-pilot's seat, Harris sliding back to assist. She didn't touch the controls so Reynolds was still the captain but her voice guided every move. Lower the gear early, she said. It'll add drag, but we need to slow down. Reynolds nodded, his hands moving with newfound confidence. The plane was still losing altitude, but Clara's calm was contagious, steadying the cockpit even as the alarms blared. In the cabin, the passengers had no idea who was saving them, but they felt the shift. The plane's wild lurches had smoothed out, that descent less terrifying. Greg, the man in the suit, was gripping his armrests, his face pale. He kept glancing back at row 27, where Clara's empty seat sat, her book still open on the tray table. Who the hell is she? He muttered again, but this time there was no mockery in his voice, only awe. As the plane approached Hawthorne, the real challenge loomed. The runway was barely 4,800 feet, half the length needed for a safe landing. Clara's mind was racing, calculating wind speed, weight distribution, and braking power. She'd done this before, but never with 200 lives depending on her. Flaps to 30, she said. Throttle back to 60%. We're coming in hot, but we can stop if you hit the brakes hard the second we touch down. Reynolds nodded, his jaw tight. You sure about this? Clara met his eyes, her voice steady. I've got you. The ground rushed up, the tiny runway appearing like a postage stamp against the Nevada desert. The passengers braced, some whispering prayers, others holding loved ones. The plane hit the runway with a bone-rattling thud, tires screeching as Reynolds slammed the brakes. Clara's voice was a steady drumbeat. Reverse thrust. Now. Hard left rudder. The plane skidded, veering slightly, but Reynolds followed her every word. The end of the runway loomed, a chain-link fence and open desert beyond. For a heartbeat, it seemed they wouldn't stop in time. Then, with the final groan, the plane shuddered to a halt, just feet from the fence. The cabin was silent for a moment, then erupted in cheers, sobs, and gasps of relief. Clara exhaled, her hands finally trembling as the adrenaline ebbed. Reynolds turned to her, his face a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Who are you? He asked again. Clara smiled faintly, unbuckling her harness. Just a mom trying to get to her daughter. She stood, leaving the cockpit before he could say more. As she stepped back into the cabin, the passengers were still reeling, some hugging, others crying. The flight attendants were trying to organize an evacuation, but all eyes turned to Clara. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire plane was applauding, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Greg, the man in the suit, stood, his face flushed with shame. Ma'am, he stammered. A broken bar. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. It's okay, she said softly. You couldn't have. The evacuation was swift, passengers spilling onto the tarmac under the Nevada sun. Emergency crews were already there, lights flashing. As Clara slipped into the crowd, unnoticed once more, she didn't need the spotlight as she never had. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Lily. Mom, you okay? Heard about a plane emergency on the news. Clara smiled, typing back, I'm fine, sweetheart. On my way. As the passengers were bussed to a nearby terminal, stories began to spread. A woman on the plane had saved them. A woman who knew how to fly. A woman who'd been mocked but turned out to be a hero. By the time Clara reached LA later that day, the story was already going viral. Posts on X calling her the mystery pilot of Flight 214. She didn't see them. She was too busy hugging Lily, holding her daughter tight, the weight of the day melting away. The next morning, as Clara sipped coffee in Lily's dorm, her phone buzzed again. A news outlet had tracked her down, wanting an interview. She declined politely, setting the phone down. Her life wasn't about headlines or applause. It was about moments like these, a quiet, real, with the people she loved. But the story of Flight 214 would live on, a testament to the strength hidden in those who are underestimated, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear denim jackets and sit in row 27C. So, Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment and let us know which part of the country you're in. We'd love to hear from you.